Christenson, Cleanfax editor, and I'm speaking with Norris Gearhart, First OnSite's Executive Vice President, Regulatory Business Practice. Norris is a seasoned leader in biothreat remediation and cleanup, having managed anthrax scares, Ebola operations, and even the early wave of COVID-19. Today, he's focused on addressing the systematic gaps that leave public health and restoration efforts vulnerable. So, Norris, let's get right into this. We're seeing a convergence of infectious, chemical, and trauma-related hazards at a scale that few other industries endure or local responders are fully prepared for. So, could you first walk us through your position at First OnSite and then the current biohazard threats that restoration professionals are facing today?
Sure. My role at First OnSite right now, I oversee our regulatory business practice. And what does that mean? Well, within the regulatory business practice, we have our indoor air quality, HVAC, asbestos, lead, biohazard, environmental cleanup, as well as our life science divisions too, which get into vivariums and research facilities and the type of work that needs to be done in those areas, the specialty type of cleaning. I also oversee or am the director of our First OnSite Academy, which is our or in-house training academy for our processes and the best in class ways to do business and making sure that we're consistent across all of our branches.
Okay. And you kind of touched on it there, but what are some of the biohazard threats that restoration professionals are facing today? I guess the most challenging ones.
You know, there's so many, and climate change driven extreme weather conditions are having a big impact and driving ideal conditions for emerging biohazards that we're familiar with. Anything from sanitary type things with like cholera and dysentery to really emerging threats from around the world as we continue to make the world smaller and encroach on the natural habitat of the other critters that inhabit this space. We become much more exposed to pathogens that weren't something that we were accustomed to seeing. The other thing that I think we're really dealing with right now, and it's catching the news, and what you brought it up is reemerging infections like the measles, right? With the disinformation, the fears and concerns, many of the diseases that we had pretty much written off in the last couple of generations, people aren't even familiar with, are now making a comeback. And that is a concern. We also have some pretty significant mental health issues out there that you might think, well, how does that play into it? But it layers on top of all of those things, right? Everything from malicious things that are done from folks who aren't necessarily mentally well to just way things are handled and perceptions. The other thing that's really big is we've got an aging population. So as the population ages, of course, our immune systems don't work as well. We are much more immunocompromised, whether it be through other diseases or even very often through medication that we're taking for something that we may have. In any case, we're much more susceptible to that as a population than we have been in the past.
You're right on. I mean, you just mentioned a lot of things that I'm always constantly seeing in the news that affects the restoration industry. So then how can restoration professionals, what can they do to better prepare for all of these biohazards? And there's so many.
There are. And the biggest thing is to educate ourselves. We've really got to understand what those risks are. You mentioned Ebola, or not Ebola, COVID in the early part of my introduction there. And I was astounded. I was working as a consultant to the industry as part of the joint task force with the IICRC and the RIA, creating a guidance paper for the industry. But I was stunned at how ignorant we were as an industry first off about what a viral threat might be, and second, about the precautions that we need to take and even the tools that we use. We use disinfectants and sanitizers every day on almost every project in our industry. Yet, ask anyone who's applying those some very basic questions about the active ingredients in the product, about what the log reduction might be on the product, about whether or not that product will work on gram-positive or gram-negative bacteria, or enveloped or non-enveloped viruses, or and there's no answers. What is the dwell time requirement on that? How can it be applied? Are you familiar with quat binding? People get, look at you like you got two heads. And this is stuff that they're using every day on our equipment, in our clients' places, and for their own health and safety. And they're using it incorrectly. And that's a huge issue. There's a very widely used organic product out there that advertises 30 seconds for a very high log reduction. In reality, there's only 3 pathogens that works in 30 seconds on. And everything else steps up from there all the way up to as much as an hour, depending upon how it's being applied. So it's incumbent on us as the professional to understand the products that we're using and the tools that we're using and how to use them appropriately. One of my other pet peeves is electrostatic sprayers. Regardless of any other things about electrostatic sprayers, the biggest thing you have to understand is that again, that surface needs to be wet with whatever that product is for at least 10 minutes. Well, if you're going past it really quickly, whatever that application might be, is it staying wet for that period of time? Is the electric charge that's been placed on that droplet creating surface tension that's leaving little areas of gaps like an orange peel on that surface that's not being impacted by the disinfectant? Is it the appropriate product, the appropriate method of application for what you're trying to do? Do you know what the potential risks are that you're trying to eliminate? And are you doing it right? I mean, that's one of the most basic things that I think we've got to get a handle on. And it goes back, our industry is always, we joke about carpet cleaning, going back to the history of our industry, right? It only takes an ounce for 5 gallons. Well, that's a double glug and it's extra dirty. Let me give it some more. We all know the consequence of that. It's just the opposite. We can't go into these emerging threats with that kind of mindset. And as an industry so far, we have.
You are absolutely right. I'm seeing the gap in education is something that our industry really needs to step up and take make it more of a pressing matter, I think. Go ahead.
And I know that, not to beat a dead horse, but we need to be aware of what's going on. We need to stay informed of what the emerging pathogens are, what's going on through sources. Stay up to date on what's going on through the CDC or through the World Health Organization on what those emerging risks are. Basic hygiene. Everyone got real conscious about washing their hands during COVID, but I pay attention, and that's gone out the window.
Right.
We've lost that emphasis again. That something as simple as that is really, really important, and just our daily precautions. And the other is getting your vaccinations, making sure that we're properly vaccinated. In our industry, under OSHA, we're required to give our staff the opportunity to be vaccinated with Hep B, right? And by law, if they turn it down, then we have that letter of declination in their file. The reality is the Hep B in blood, the bulk of our folks aren't going to be exposed to that in a very regular high-risk basis. But there's a vaccination for hepatitis A. Now, where does hepatitis A show up? In feces, right? In every water loss. Anytime Fifi's gone on the carpet or sewage backup or gray water, it doesn't matter. We have a potential risk of exposure to Hep A. Yet there is very, very little awareness or taken advantage of being vaccinated for hepatitis A. So as an industry in general, we've got to do a better job of accepting the responsibility of understanding what the risks are from a health and safety standpoint, and then later we'll get into it from a insurance and licensing and liability standpoint.
Right. And something that we haven't touched on yet that I know it's becoming more of an issue is the fentanyl related cleanups.
Yeah.
They're just overwhelming responders who lack specialized training. How is the restoration industry stepping up to the challenge, and what more needs to be done?
Yeah, I don't think we're doing well at it, and we do a lot of fentanyl cleanup across the country with First OnSite. Uh, we have that capability in-house at some of our locations, and then we have some really good partners in other regions to work with. The fentanyl risk is real and serious. At the same time, it can be a little overblown. And how do you walk that line? Uh, you need to have appropriate protocols in place, buddy systems, and the basic PPE. The biggest areas that we're struggling with is industrial hygienists, certified industrial hygienists, who actually have the knowledge, the capability, and the willingness to go in and do the initial survey to help create that protocol for us to execute, and then doing the clearance testing. And where
Okay.
we have those folks available, they are running into a challenge. We encountered something just recently where the only labs anywhere reasonably close who could do the validation or the testing on the samples were more than 2 weeks backed up.
Oh,
So in that case, you either deny a space for that period of time, which in most cases no one wants to do from an economic standpoint, or even just a use requirement standpoint, or you have to assume the worst and incur that expense. The other area where we're dropping the ball, and this carries over to this conversation in a bigger way, is in educating the consumer, because the consumer figures a cleanup is a cleanup and anyone can do the cleanup. And I had Joe's Cleaning Service come in, and they said they could clean up this area that had an unattended death with fentanyl, for $2,500, and you're coming back with 10,000. You're just trying to rip me off, and they don't understand the risk. I mean, the risk of death that's there, not even counting the risk of liability, and they're looking at that
right.
dollar value from an uninformed standpoint. And and sadly, there's plenty of those folks who will still come in there and do that because they don't know any better.
Right. Well, and that gets into my next question here. What are some of the biggest misconceptions that homeowners have about biohazard remediation and cleanup? And how can restoration professionals educate clients?
It's prior to this, I did a quick Google search across a bunch of restoration organizations in the company and their web pages, and I will say that I saw a lot of really good landing pages with information like this for the consumer. Whether the consumer ever sees it, reads it, takes it in or not, that's a whole other story. But some of those misconceptions are that, again, any cleaner can do it.
Right.
It's a cleanup job. It's not a big deal. Bleach will take care of it. That's not going to work on most things that people think bleach works for, right? Another misconception is that law enforcement or EMS is going to clean it up.
Oh.
That's not happening, right? Or it's only blood. It's just a quick cleanup. It's a small amount of blood. It's no big deal. We don't really need to take that risk. It's safer if you let it dry first. That's absolutely not true. That's a
Right.
great way to aerosolize the dry material, depending upon how it's being done, or have it cross contaminated into other areas. That's an issue where it can wait. It can wait. It's not a rush. It's there. It is what it is. But they don't take into account the fact that the longer it stays, regardless of what it is, whether it's bio or chemical or whatever else, the greater the opportunity for cross contamination, for pests, whatever that might be. Um, and it's not necessary for those little incidents. It's not a big deal. It's just a little bit. We can take care of it. The risk is small. That's not true. And then the biggest stumbling block that we run into, and even with our biggest clients and property managers, is just that what you're telling me is too expensive. I can't justify that. My insurance isn't going to cover that. Our deductible is too high. That's crazy. You're just trying to take advantage of my fear or create fear. So those are some of the things that we see on a regular basis.
Well, moving into 2026 here, we're getting closer every day. Where do
Yeah.
you see the biggest gaps in service? And then along with that, what do you anticipate for the restoration industry regarding biohazard challenges?
Hmm. Well, our biggest gaps in service are some of the things I already highlighted, I believe.
Mhm.
You know, the skill gap on our side,
Right.
uh, the willful ignorance on our side. And listen, as I look back over my career, I've said this many a times. I'm grateful for two things. One, I didn't kill anyone that I know of, and two, I didn't get my butt completely sued off. And knowing what I know now, and looking back over the past, and we can look at just even mold remediation compared, 20 years ago compared to what it is now, and understanding that it wasn't because I was trying to cut corners or do anything, nefarious or negligent. I always tried to be cutting edge and do the best I could with the most knowledge. But I don't know what I don't know, and I still don't know what I don't know. Uh,
Right.
but it's easy to become complacent in what we do know, or what we think we know, and not look outside of our own little echo chamber of suppliers that we might be working with, our other peers, or that kind of thing, for more information. That that is just a huge concern. I think some of the other gaps is the understanding of the regulations that are around these types of services, depending upon where you are. The licensing and insurance requirements for generating that waste, for transporting that waste, for storing that waste, for disposing of that waste. Uh, all of those steps, as well as our insurance. What portions of that are covered by our insurance and are not covered? And I can tell you that our folks that we're buying the insurance from aren't necessarily fully informed either. And I'll give
Right.
you a really simple example that doesn't apply to this. I had my insurance broker sit in my office one day, and I was on the phone waiting. I played golf with him once a week. I was in Rotary with him. He knew me, he knew my business, and I had before and after pictures up of total loss fires. And I got off the phone and he goes, Did you do all these? I'm like, It's what I do. You know that. He goes, Well, you're not covered for that. I'm like, What do you mean I'm not covered for that? Because at that level, you need to build a risk policy. This is a guy who had been writing my insurance, who had been in my office, who knew my business for years. That just finally clicked. Now that's about as basic as it gets. When we start getting into the complexity that we're talking here, it is really, really critical that insurance professional fully understands what we're doing and what our potential exposures are.